Hey, it's author and attorney Kelly O'Connell. Good evening. I'm offering one sweet and nutritious message with each podcast on Knockout Radio. Hope you're doing well. And we're having a current heat wave in the west out here, and it's supposed to be, I think somebody said, once in 1,500 year drought. I don't know. You never know what this stuff is true or not, but it at least has got a lot of people worried, and there's many water systems that are getting very low, and so keep those people in the west, those farmers, in your prayers. All right, the topic today, St. Anthony Fauci, murderer. Can't believe it, huh? Let me get to that in just a moment. It is kind of shocking to hear, but I have also got a little bit of weird animal news for you. And there's a story in China about some elephants that went on a jaunt, and for some reason they wandered off about 300 miles from their home, and I think they had been moved into the jungle somewhere, and now they've gone 300 miles, and one of them went off on its own, and it went even farther, but I think they're all back together, and they are the preserve is in the Yunnan province, and they left a year ago. They've gone 300 miles, and they're on the outskirts of provincial capital Kunming, wherever that is. So it's not really clear what they're doing, but I guess they weren't happy where they were at. Did you hear about that story of the flight that had the guy get up and disrupted people and punch some flight attendants and such? Well, it turns out that guy was on Delta Airlines from Atlanta to Los Angeles, and they diverted in Oklahoma because a guy got up and he used the intercom and he started to say things like, prepare your masks, you're going to need them. And so he got in a fight, and they tackled him, and they handcuffed him, and it turned out, believe it or not, that he was a flight attendant. And it sounded like he was just completely out of his mind. So, a seat on Bezos' Blue Origin flight is going to sell for $28 million at auction. It sold for $28 million at an auction. So, that's pretty amazing. And there was one other story I wanted to tell you about, and it is the fact that a Cape Cod lobster man, just like Jonah in the Bible, was swallowed by a whale. And he was in there, and he said he could feel muscles and tendons, and it swallowed him, and then he was spit out. So if you say that it couldn't happen to Jonah, well, it happened to this guy, Michael Packard, Cape Cod lobsterman, and swallowed by a humpback whale. And believe it or not, he had also survived a plane crash in Costa Rica that killed 3 other people. So he is a pretty lucky guy. And he said that when he was swallowed by the whale, he said, all of a sudden I felt like I got hit by a freight train and everything went black. It went black, and it was like, oh my God, what the heck? Where am I? Did I just get bitten by a great white? And then I realized after I said it's not a shark, the only thing it could be is I just got eaten by a whale, and then he was spit up 30 or 40 seconds later. Pretty lucky, huh? He wasn't in there for 3 days. So anyway, let's get to this article that I have written for Canada Free Press that I have not sent in yet. St. Anthony Fauci, murderer. All right, so why am I calling him a murderer? All right, so Fauci is in the group of people that I consider to be intellectual yet idiot class. And I'll tell you about that in a minute. Now, currently Democrats are opposing a Wuhan Lab investigation, but it's become so obvious that even a blind cavefish would notice that Dr. Anthony DOA Dead on Arrival Fauci is a world-class con artist, much like Yellow Kid Weil. Now, Yellow Kid Weil was around 1900, I think, and he was a guy that stole the equivalent of $20 or $30 million, and he's got quite a story, so look him up. Just look up Yellow Kid, con artist. But did you hear the other day that Fauci was complaining that COVID has proved that there's racism in medicine? So this guy's very political, right? And he also stated that if you attack him, you're fooling yourself. You're not being fair to yourself because you're attacking science itself. So, did we fail by questioning Anthony? Did we bet on the wrong horse? No, because science is a technique. It is not a person, and don't ever forget that. I have to tell myself that, of course. But this guy is 78 years old, and he is very much a worshipful person of his legend. So although we know he won't be punished for his evil deeds, we can at least tear him up in social media and on podcasts and in the news. So we need to defend ourselves, protect ourselves in the future from incompetent experts, which Nassim Taleb describes in The Skin Game and also in The Black Swan. He says an intellectual yet idiot is IYI are a class of people who constantly get in over their heads, and they're probably from Harvard or Yale. They're from the Ivy League, and they usually can do one thing and then they try to do other things and they're not very good, but a lot of times they can't do anything. So the question I'm asking is, how many deaths did Fauci cause? Now, you might say, how in the heck could I go after Fauci? He's a legend. He is Paul Bunyan. He is Davy Crockett. He is George Washington of our era. And is that true? Well, he can't be George Washington. George Washington was 6'2", and I think Fauci is like 5'5". But the most terrible question that Fauci has to answer is, did you cause COVID? Dr. Fauci, did you cause COVID? I'd really like to know. Now, this is why I think it's a good question. First, Fauci has stated and made a lot of waves before of being a huge fan of gain-of-function experiments, which create dangerous viruses. Now, there's a cabal, there's a group of people in the government here that fight for that. Gain of function is to take a virus and make it worse, go in and fiddle with it on a molecular level, on a genetic level, and make it worse so that it attacks people. Now, they're not trying to just go randomly kill a bunch of people. They're trying to come up with antidotes, with vaccines. And so it's a real challenge to these guys. But America had banned it and made it illegal. So, second, without telling Trump in 2017, he restarted the U.S. gain-of-function experiments without Trump's knowledge. Now, third, he paid the Wuhan Lab millions, and despite knowing that they worked in gain-of-function. And I personally believe, just based on his body language and the way he answered questions, is he was paying for gain-of-function, and it went wrong. So he knows these things are dangerous, extremely dangerous. How do we know that he knew that? Well, he knew it from his work in viruses, but he also knew that because he wanted the lab work changed from North Carolina to China so Americans weren't put into danger. So it can't be all that bad, right? Except what was going on in China is they were doing these experiments, and the same group of people that were working on bats that came from, if I'm not mistaken, Africa, taken to China, and they're doing these procedures, and then all hell breaks loose. Now, did you know Fauci even predicted Trump would have a virus outbreak? Isn't that strange? And he also said that an outbreak would be worth the cost because it would be so meaningful to the human race. Now, that's sick, isn't it? Now, here's my question, and this is why I asked if he created it. And I had asked before if they had used the virus to get Trump, and they did use the virus to get Trump, but I don't know if it was the way that I asked previously, which is he loves gain of function. He loves making super viruses so they can get vaccines. he paid money to China. He said that he made it legal for Americans to do gain of function again. Don't forget that. He didn't want him to do it in North Carolina. It should be done in China. So they did it in China, and this thing escaped. And we know it escaped there because at the same time as COVID broke out, 3 of the workers got sick from the same section when they lived in the same area. So we know that this happened. My question is, would they have done these experiments if they didn't know, or if they didn't have the money in the direction from Fauci? And I think that is one hell of a question. And if the answer is yes, then he's responsible for 3.7 million deaths around the world. Shocking. All right, so after the virus surfaced, what happened? Well, as you recall, when the news broke, Fauci was there. He was giving all his opinions and stuff, and he and Trump got involved. And he and Fauci began to disagree with one another. But Fauci, now we know from his emails, was secretly panicking. And a friend of his or somebody he knew sent him an email that said, this thing looks like it was man-made. So then Fauci immediately starts saying it's obviously a wild virus. And so we know he was hiding something. I think he was hiding his involvement from the very bottom, very beginning. So for a year, he pretends that China couldn't have spawned the disease. There were some letters that were sent in. And one of the letters was from a guy that was involved in this. So he was self-interested. So he does his little Wuhan dance, his little song and dance, defends China, says, I've got your back or whatever. And he also makes misleading and contradictory statements. You're supposed to have masks in the beginning. You're not supposed to have masks in the beginning, as you recall. And then you're supposed to have masks. And then at the end, you're supposed to wear 2 masks until Rand Paul confronted him. If Rand Paul hadn't confronted him, I believe we would still be in shutdown, which I'll tell you how dangerous that is. So he's a smart aleck. He knows more than other people. Rand Paul is a medical doctor. He's an ophthalmologist, and he basically took Fauci to task and he basically outsparred him. He got Fauci to admit that it was just theater to wear a mask when you've already been vaccinated. And Rand Paul said there is nobody on record who has gotten vaccinated and then got the disease again. So then Fauci says, well, yeah, I guess so. And then I think Rand Paul said, do you really need one outside? I mean, we're outside, there's no record of people getting this disease outside. So Fauci says, yeah, I guess, And he says, if you're at home and you're vaccinated, you don't need a mask. So basically, even though he's been selling the mask and the shutdown for a year and a half, he suddenly backs off because Rand Paul confronts him. So Rand Paul is a patriot, folks. That's what a patriot looks like. And so after this, he starts to become unhinged. And now the other day you saw people, he said, if people challenge me, they're challenging science. Well, that is not science, that's self-worship. He's put himself out as a god. People were hanging on his every move, his every statement, and he totally let people down. And so think about it this way. Florida never had a mask mandate and has done better than almost every state. New York had probably the toughest mask mandates, and it has the second worst death toll, in part because this idiot Cuomo took all these sick people, sick seniors, and put them back into nursing homes. And the sad thing about that is the one group of people that's very vulnerable. So an extra 20,000 people died. So of course their numbers went up. And why did he do that? It's simple. It's all of this stuff rotates around one fact. They hated Trump's guts and they were going to get rid of him. Okay? So Trump had set up a military hospital there. He had sent the ship Hope, this medical ship from the Navy there. They never sent one person to the ship Hope, and I don't think they sent any to the hospital because they're trying to make Trump look like an idiot when he's doing a great job. He did a great job. So now experts claim there is a 1,000,000,000 to 1 chance the virus did not come from Wuhan. So I just talked to my sister, and she has always been skeptical of Fauci. Now, Robert Kennedy Jr. claimed Fauci was a fraud for generations. Now, the National Review said, but Dr. Fauci is much worse than a fraud. He is a technocrat. He doesn't see himself as simply someone to explain the science of the virus, but appointed himself a COVID czar. He leveraged the corporate press's personality cult and used it to manipulate the public to behave the way he wanted them to behave. And I find that very, very wrong, my friends, very wrong. Now, I'm actually baking a pie right now, strawberry rhubarb pie, so I keep having to stop and get up and look at it. But in any event, now, deaths from COVID. And I want to tell you what my sister told me before I forget about it. We were on the phone, and she said that she's been doing a lot of training online, and nobody can now talk about prevention. They can't talk about prevention. So, deaths from COVID. How many have died in America? Right now, about 615,000 have said to have died from COVID, although we know that in a lot of cases it might have been death by something else, but the person had COVID, so that's an issue. But, the way that that Fauci handled himself, part of his power was he kind of acted like a magus. He acted like he had all this knowledge, and he would just kind of part out just a little bit of whatever was needed for the situation, but he was short on details, right? And he was short on proof. So I listened to one podcast and did some research, and a gentleman said that the way they went after hydroxychloroquine, when Trump said this could save people, and then the media and the medical community got up in arms and said this is true, it's false, it's another Trump lie, blah, blah, blah. Well, one of the gentlemen that I just watched, and I've got all this stuff linked in there, so remember when you go into listen that I've got notes underneath, that maybe 100,000 lives could have been saved or more. So Fauci lied and people died. Now, because he was part of that total rejection of Fauci, of hydrochloroquine. Don't think of Fauci as a great doctor. Think of him as a political player who is trying to maximize his power. And how does he do that? He stays on the right side of the elites, of the liberals, of the people in power. Not, Trump was in the presidency, but this country is mostly run by elite leftists. So what if Fauci wasn't, I had a question. What if Fauci wasn't nervous about China? That he had maybe helped create this monster? Would he have stood up to China? Would he have requested that they do some research and give him code? They could have saved a lot of people. Did he give funding that tied in directly in a roundabout way to the bat gain-of-function experiments? If so, he might have joint responsibility for about 3.8 million dead people around the world. Now, I've got some more analysis here that is just going to blow your mind, but let me go check on my pie. All right, it seems okay. Why do people they don't just put holes in pies, they also put faces in them, which I did as well. All right, so anyway, how about deaths not caused by COVID directly but indirectly? All right, this is what Scott Atlas talks about. He talks about all of the people who died from isolation, despair, from drug overdoses, from from untreated illness. So I've got this linked in there. And it says, it's from an article that he wrote, Fauci is a political animal. All right, so here's part of it. The lost economic output in the U.S. alone is estimated to be 5% of GDP, or $1.1 trillion for every month of the economic shutdown. This lost income results in lost lives, as the stresses of unemployment and providing basic needs increase the incidence of suicide, alcohol, or drug abuse, and stress-induced illnesses. These effects are particularly severe on the lower income populace, as they are more likely to lose their jobs, and mortality rates are much higher for lower income individuals. Statistically, every 10 million to 24 million lost in U.S. incomes results in one additional death. One portion of this effect is through unemployment, which leads to an average increase in mortality of at least 60%. That translates into 7,200 lives lost per month among the 36 million newly unemployed Americans, over 40% of whom are not expected to regain their jobs. In addition, many small business owners are near financial collapse, creating lost wealth that results in mortality increases of 50%. With an average estimate of one additional lost life per 17 million income loss, that would translate to 65,000 lost lives in the U.S. for each month because of the economic shutdown. So let's say that we've been shut down. We got shut down in March the year before, right? So we have got 15 months of times 65,000. Okay, so the number is 975,000. Essentially 1 million people. I mean, I'm sure that wouldn't shock anybody to hear that the side effect of shutting everybody up for a year and a half is 1 million people died. And that is not caused by COVID. So, unbelievable, really. Now, you think about it, and it kind of goes without saying, but you kind of have to pick your way through it, right? I mean, it's something that you've got to go and do what Atlas did, which was add up all the different ways that people are harmed by shutdowns and that type of thing. Now, shutdowns don't work, have not worked in the past. Why didn't Fauci focus on that? Well, and the masks. I mean, Fauci knew that the mask didn't work outside of a hospital, but he still encouraged people to use them. So he's just kind of a snake oil salesman. He's a fraud. And he was trying to write a book, and I was astounded to hear it was only 80 pages long. I don't know what it was supposed to be about, but they put it out as a pre-publication, and it just tanked. And now that his reputation is destroyed, there's no reason to sell a book, but he's still running things, and he needs to be gotten out of there. We need to get him out of there, and I'd like to have some sort of a hearing in which all of his sins were brought up to him. So Governor Cuomo was paid $5.1 million for his COVID memoir, and it fails to mention the 20,000 senior citizens that he helped kill by sending sick COVID seniors back into nursing homes instead of into these hospitals that Trump set up. And the writer of one of the articles I read on it said it's probably the largest sum of money from a side gig ever earned by a governor. So, how did this affect the election? Well, what do you think happened when Fauci kept backstabbing and undermining President Trump? And there was a narrative that came out that Trump's biggest mistake, his biggest disaster, was COVID. Now, the sad thing is part of the formation of COVID comes from Fauci's investment, some millions of dollars into the Wuhan Lab, gain-of-function lab. Of course, he doesn't tell anybody that until Rand Paul smoked him out. And another sad thing is he made mistakes, but he pretended that he was right and Trump was wrong. So he didn't like Trump, but it's partisanship. It's not that Trump was so obnoxious that he had to hate him. It's like all of these guys. Now, I told my sister that my theory is that these guys were getting ready to do all these switches when Hillary was running for office. And one of the things she said, she's kind of mentally ill, in my opinion, the way she talks. But she had mentioned that she was going to let in something like what was it, 300 million people from South America. She was going to have an open door in North America, in America, for United States, for anybody who was in North or South America. And that's hundreds of millions of people that would want to come here. So they were planning on doing all this crazy stuff, but now added into it in the COVID protocol is that the social media has to shut people down if they say something that is not the current opinion. Now, they don't have to do that. And I mentioned to my sister that John Milton, the great poet, supposedly the second greatest English writer after Shakespeare, who was in the government and was interested in politics, he had come up with something called the Areopagitica. Areopagiticus. It was an argument, and the title comes from the Bible, where there was a place in Athens where they could go and anybody could say anything they want. It was a small area. So what John Milton, who was in the House of Commons, argued that you should let people don't censor books. Let people be exposed to every kind of an idea, because how else are they going to discover what's a bad idea if you don't compare it to good ideas? So now you've got these social media giants, Facebook and Twitter and all these, who are actively censoring conversation. We've never done that before. Well, we haven't done it for a long time. United States invented the kind of freedom of speech that we have, and now it's all getting trampled underfoot. So, about the election, the main goal was to get rid of Trump so they could continue with changing and doing what Obama promised, which was radically change the country. So now you've got probably 2 million illegals that are going to come across the border this year. And did you know that they only stop convicted murderers and convicted rapists? Everybody else is allowed to come in here, and that includes child molesters. So, the kind of analysis that Dr. Atlas did, Scott Atlas, how many children will have their lives ruined by molestations from these large number of people? If you were living in a country and you were a child molester and you were, on a sex offender list and all this, wouldn't you want to go to the country next door and start over? So if Fauci had admitted that Trump might be right about Wuhan, that the Chinese made the virus, that they let it go, he probably would have been elected, right? Or that he was right about hydrochloroquine and hundreds of thousands of people would have been treated with it and would have survived. So bureaucrat Fauci hated Trump's style, his freewheeling style, but he also knew that Trump would go after him if he was wrong, and Biden could hide under, or Fauci could hide under Biden's demented wings. So Fauci was protecting himself, but my sister had told me he was somehow invested in the vaccines as well. I haven't researched that. So there was one audio that I listened to, and the conversation was between probably Rand Paul and Fauci on the crowds for the protesters, and they asked Fauci if he would comment on all of these people that were in the riots and the protests for George Floyd who didn't have a mask on, and how that obviously was spreading COVID. And he said, well, that's not my concern. And they said, well, you're the national virus guy. Isn't it all your concern? And he said, well, I'm not going to get involved in it. That's politics. The hilarious thing is he's like the most politically motivated guy out there. And he's corrupt. He wants money. He wants fame. He's comparing himself to Brad Pitt. So if he had just been honest, I think Trump gets reelected even with COVID, because Trump did everything in his power to try to get an antidote, a vaccine, and he did, and then Biden comes in and takes advantage of it. So here's the conclusion that I come to. This whole mess involving, Trump and Fauci, the United States government, the medical economy or the medical group, the Chinese and everything. It's a total mess, and we're losing control of our medical establishment, according to my sister, who's a nurse. Now, China's irredeemable. Instead of helping the world fight COVID, they pretended they didn't have anything to do with it. Now they've moved on to breeding human-animal chimera hybrids. So part pig, part human, part squirrel, part human. We've got to fight back against them, my friends. You know that. Now, there needs to be an immediate reckoning of Anthony Fauci and his spectacular errors, one after the other, that helped kill so many Americans. It tipped an election. Now, Taleb wrote about Intellectual Yet Idiot, and Fauci is exactly what he was thinking on. Long ago, Fauci traded the Hippocratic Oath to do no harm for the bright lights and big city of D.C., advanced leftism, and the big bucks and fame. So Fauci did choose politics over the lives of innocent Americans, just to ruin Trump, to gain favor with Democrat, the ruling junta, and also to protect himself. There needs to be an accounting. We know that. He needs to have his sins recounted one by one in front of a national audience. You can't go after these government employees, by the way. Sovereign immunity or something like that. So, the GOP is going to have to get back in power, and then they'll still probably blow it like they did in Benghazi. But we now know the truth, and the truth is what's going to set us free. And we just have to keep the fight up and just keep moving on. Until then, dear friends, speak the truth to all who will listen. Shalom. Thank you for tuning in. Kelly O'Connell, it was really great to spend some time with you tonight. And I hope you have a wonderful day. This was a little bit longer of a broadcast, but I think it's going to pay off. I think you're going to enjoy this one as you look back on it. Be sure to subscribe so I can build up a base and get some more information out there. And then so we can interact with one another, leave some comments. Have a great day and stay safe. Ciao. Kelly O'Connell, Knockout Radio.